Hey everyone, this is Brad, and I'll be talking about bike shares. This will go great with our pre-recorded lecture from this week on bike infrastructure. There is a little bit of overlap and several similar themes, but excited to get into this as an avid cyclist myself. So obviously bike shares are kind of under the micromobility umbrella along with e-bikes and e-scooters. As you can see from the graph on the top right, dockless systems are starting to grow a lot in popularity with companies like Spin, Jump, and Lime. And the majority of station-based systems are starting to switch towards switching their fleets towards e-bikes. So a majority of new bike shares in general are e-bikes nowadays. E-scooters are also growing quite a bit recently, with their ridership more than doubling that of bike share systems in 2018 and 2019. Kind of interesting just as this, with a few emerging trends in micromobility. As far as benefits and challenges, obviously bike shares are a great active transportation option. It makes it easier to get around in urban areas. They're a great first last mile connection for transit and bus users. And a lot of times with station-based systems, a lot of the bike share stations are kind of located around transit stations. As far as a mode shift, it's kind of interesting to see that bike shares, at least in urban areas, are starting to replace a lot of different car trips and taxi trips, things like ride shares. Like I said, there are some challenges as far as permitting regulation, and this is really a lot with the dockless stations. As you can see, there are some issues with parking, particularly with dockless stations, as far as privacy concerns. There are privacy concerns with some data sharing for both dockless and station-based systems. And then with station systems, service reliability, and especially during peak time, making sure that that all the different stations have enough bikes available at each one of them. Bike share systems in the US, it is a growing market, but it's kind of interesting to see how COVID has sort of shifted everything. So from 2015 to 2019, there was a large growth in US bike share systems from 64 to 104. And then in after COVID, those 104 systems have now gone down to 69, and most of the growth in docked bike share systems are now within existing systems, and some of the larger cities like New York, Boston, Chicago, and DC, where the largest bike share systems currently are. It's really interesting to see kind of how micromobility is really a dynamic industry with a lot of different manufacturers and operators. A lot of private companies like Lyft and Uber are kind of helping out in servicing and operating a lot of these systems. A lot of cities and DOTs are involved in that process and kind of not only regulate, but operate those systems as well. There is quite a bit of public-private partnership in bike share systems, which is really, really kind of cool. And then I know there are at least a few nonprofit organizations that run bike share systems. The one in Cincinnati, Red Bike, is a nonprofit. But it is kind of like I said, a dynamic industry. So as far as bike share ridership, micromobility is definitely, a booming industry overall. A lot of station-based systems have kind of plateaued as far as ridership now, and a lot of the growth has been in scooter systems and dockless bike share systems. But in 2019, there were 50 million bike share trips, and really ridership increases have been in a few major urban cities where there's kind of already a good connected, protected bike lane system, more complete streets, and kind of where it's safer to ride. As far as the types of trips that people take when they're using bike share, they tend to be shorter trips. The average trip distance is about 1 mile and just 11 minutes. So, and this is really starting to, like I said, replace a lot of private vehicle and taxi trips, and it's really complementary to transit services. As far as bike share users and the user population, Majority of riders are in the 25 to 34-year-old age range, and majority male. It is interesting in kind of going back to the pre-recorded lecture, the bicycle design user profile. I think bike share systems really help kind of serve that interested but concerned population. Riders tend to be inexperienced and more cautious. People who have their own, who are more confident tend to have their own bikes, and so these bike share systems really kind of fill the void for those inexperienced and cautious riders. And so having comfortable areas for people to ride, really, protected bike lanes are what bike share users kind of look for out of a system. So complete streets, like I said, are really important for bike share systems. The rider experience and making sure there's a clear, safe route, protected bike lanes, and really a connected network, because casual riders tend to be less familiar with different types of routes. Station locations tend to be in dense urban areas where there's more foot traffic and slower vehicular traffic. Along transit corridors, really trying to increase those multimodal type trips and start to form micro mobility hubs. So as far as equity, it is interesting. I was reading a Vox article that said, most bike share riders tend to be white, wealthy, and educated. So while this is true, it kind of follows how I think, low income and minority communities tend to be the most vulnerable when it comes to protected infrastructure and complete streets projects in general. So it's unfortunate. As far as station locations, it does seem that this is kind of changing now with systems like in Cincinnati. The Red Bike Go program is offering subsidized low income memberships, and that represents 28% of riders now. So it is good to see a lot of systems expanding into low income and minority areas. And one thing that the Red Bike system in Cincinnati did was start to figure out how to market and brand more towards those communities, with local artists, and kind of really engaging those populations. Safety, it is interesting that bike shares tend to be safer than regular bikes, with a 35% lower accident rate. That's due to them, bike shares are kind of designed with safety in mind. They're heavier and have a lower center of gravity, wider tires, and they tend to be brighter colors and flashing colors. So overall, it is kind of good to see that bike shares tend to be safer. And I touched on this a little bit, but like I said, COVID has really kind of shaken the micro-mobility industry a little bit. There has been, with an overall decrease in household trips and suspended services due to COVID, ridership for bike shares have kind of plummeted, and it's kind of left many micro-mobilities wondering about financial stability. It becomes quite a bit of an issue. So while it is uncertain, I think coming out of the pandemic, a lot of different companies and cities are optimistic about active transportation and micromobility. So I guess, see how that kind of unfolds. But these are some of the resources I looked at. NACDO was a great resource, the United States Department of Transportation. So yeah, thanks everyone.